Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, today we're jumping into something that's definitely been generating some buzz, red light therapy.
Right, also known as photobiomodulation or PBM.
Exactly. And we're going to focus specifically on how it might, play a role in dealing with inflammation in the body.
It's a fascinating area.
It really is. And to help us figure it out, we've got several sources you listeners sent over. There's a clinical meta-analysis, quite detailed, focused on arthritis.
hmm
Then a scientific review that sort of lays out the biology, the how it works part.
The mechanisms.
And another piece talking about applying red light specifically for inflammation.
Good mix of perspectives.
Definitely. And hey, before we dive in, a big thank you to redlighttherapy.rehab. That's redlighttherapy.rehab for getting this whole review started and sending over these source materials. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So our goal here is basically to unpack all this for you. We want to understand how light, just light, might actually interact with our bodies, our cells, to potentially calm inflammation.
Yeah, what does the research really tell us? What are the key takeaways?
Exactly. And, where are the gaps, what don't we know yet? That's important too.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start with the basics then. Photobiomodulation, red light therapy. What are we actually talking about here? Just like shining a red light bulb on yourself.
Huh. Well, it's a bit more specific than that, but that's the general idea. Photobiomodulation, or PBM, sometimes called low-level laser therapy, LLT, or just RLT. It all refers to using specific wavelengths of light,
Okay.
mainly in the red and near-infrared spectrum.
Yeah.
So light you can see and some you can't quite see but feel as warmth.
Right.
And the idea is applying this light to tissues, skin, muscles, joints, to try and get a therapeutic benefit.
And has this always been accepted science? Seems like I remember some skepticism.
Oh, definitely. For a long time, it was, let's say, controversial. Whether it actually did anything significant was debated. But more recent research, like that review article we have, has really started to illuminate the biological pathways.
Oh.
We're moving beyond just observing effects to trying to understand the mechanisms. How can this possibly work?
Okay, let's unpack that because that's the part that always gets me. How does light, just shining on your skin, trigger some kind of measurable scientific effect on inflammation deep inside? What's going on, like, at the cell level?
Right. This is where it gets super interesting, and it starts really small.
Yeah.
Inside your cells, specifically inside the mitochondria.
The powerhouses, right, making energy.
Exactly. That's where the initial interaction happens. Our sources point to specific molecules inside cells that actually absorb the light energy. They're called chromophores.
Chromophores. Okay.
For red and near-infrared light, the main player seems to be an enzyme called cytochrome kick oxidase. It's right there in the mitochondria, a key part of the energy production line.
So the light gets absorbed by that specific molecule.
That seems to be the primary target, yes.
Yeah.
The sources mention other possibilities too, maybe involving calcium channels, but for red light and inflammation, the focus is really on cytochrome kick oxidase in the mitochondria.
Okay, so the light hits this enzyme. Then what happens? Is it like flipping a switch?
That's a great way to put it. That photon absorption kicks off a whole cascade of events inside the cell. First off, you tend to see an increase in ATP production.
Cellular energy.
Exactly. The cell's main fuel source. So you're boosting the cell's energy levels.
Makes sense.
Then you also get a couple of other immediate things.
Yeah.
A brief, kind of controlled burst of reactive oxygen species, ROS, and an increase in nitric oxide release, plus some changes in calcium ion levels.
Whoa, hold on. ROS, reactive oxygen species. Isn't that usually like the bad stuff?
Yeah.
Oxidative stress, cell damage. Why would a burst of that be helpful for inflammation?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the sources call this out. It's sometimes referred to as the ROS paradox.
Yeah.
It seems totally counterintuitive.
Right.
So in a healthy, unstressed cell, PBM might briefly increase ROS. But, and this is the critical part, in cells that are already stressed, already inflamed, already dealing with high levels of oxidative stress.
Which is what you have in disease states.
Exactly. In those cells, PBM seems to actually help lower the overall excessive ROS levels. It might stimulate the cell's own antioxidant defense systems.
Huh. So it's like a little nudge to help the stressed cell fight back rather than just adding more stress.
That's a good analogy.
Mm.
Maybe like how exercise stresses muscles short-term but makes them stronger long-term. It's about context and dose. It's not just piling on damage. It's triggering a response.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense now. So boosted energy, this weird ROS effect. What else?
Oh, those are the immediate effects. Then you get downstream effects, tertiary effects. Sources talk about activating things called transcription factors.
It's like master control switches for genes.
Precisely. They tell genes to turn on or off,
Hmm.
and activating the right ones can lead to really beneficial things. Better cell survival, cells moving and growing to repair tissue, making new proteins needed for healing.
Okay, I'm starting to see the picture. More energy, helping stress cells manage their own stress, encouraging repair. How does this directly tackle inflammation itself?
Right, so the inflammation part, it seems to work on the signaling. PBM can modulate inflammatory pathways. For instance, while it might briefly activate something like NFKB in a normal cell,
Which is linked to inflammation, right?
it is. But again, context matters. In cells that are already activated and inflamed, PBM seems to do the opposite. It helps decrease the activity of these pathways and reduce the production of those pro-inflammatory chemicals.
You mean like TNF alpha, IL-1 beta?
Exactly. The ones that really drive the inflammatory process, causing pain and swelling. PBM appears to help turn down the volume on those signals when they're cranked up too high in chronic conditions. It's about restoring balance.
Okay, dialing down the alarm signals. What else?
It also seems to influence immune cells, particularly macrophages. These cells can either promote inflammation or help clean up and repair. PBM seems to push them away from the pro-inflammatory type, the M1 phenotype, towards a more resolving state,
Shifting the immune response.
kind of nudging it towards healing. And remember that nitric oxide increase we mentioned?
Yeah.
Nitric oxide is a vasodilator. It helps relax blood vessels.
Ah, better blood flow.
Exactly. Improved circulation is crucial. It helps flush out inflammatory waste products and brings in more oxygen and nutrients that the tissues need to repair themselves.
Wow, okay, so it's not just one single thing. It's like boosting energy, managing cellular stress, turning down inflammatory signals, influencing immune cells, and improving circulation. It's hitting it from multiple angles.
That's a really good summary. So multi-target effect at the cellular level. And one more crucial piece mentioned in the sources is the biphasic dose response,
Biphasic, meaning
meaning the amount of light energy is critical. There's a therapeutic window. Too little light might not do much, but maybe surprisingly, too much light might actually be less effective, or it could even inhibit the desired effects.
so more isn't automatically better. You need the right amount.
Precisely. Finding that sweet spot, the right dose for the right condition, is key.
That totally makes sense. Okay, this gives us a really solid grounding in the potential science. Fascinating stuff. Now, let's shift gears. What about the real world? The clinical evidence. What do the studies, especially the ones in our sources, actually show about using this for inflammation? This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, moving from the lab bench to the clinic. So looking across the sources, one fairly consistent theme is that PBM seems capable of producing an overall reduction in inflammation in different tissues.
Like where specifically?
Well, the sources mention joints, obviously, with the arthritis focus. Also things like traumatic injuries, muscle recovery after exercise, and even hints from animal work and some clinical suggestions about areas like the lungs and the brain.
Okay. And which specific conditions linked to inflammation did the sources highlight as potential targets for red light therapy?
One of the articles provided a pretty comprehensive list based on where inflammation is a key factor. Let's see. Joint pain and arthritis, both OA and RA, which we'll definitely get into with that meta-analysis. Also muscle recovery, helping athletes maybe. Skin inflammation, things like rosacea, acne, eczema. It mentions potentially helping with autoimmune flare-ups, tendinitis, bursitis, and even neuropathic inflammation.
Nerve pain, brain fog type stuff.
Yeah, potentially related to that. So a pretty broad range where inflammation is the common thread.
Okay, let's zoom in on arthritis then, since we have that specific 2000 meta-analysis. What did that big review actually find?
Right. So this meta-analysis from 2000, published in The Lancet, looks systematically at randomized controlled trials of low-level laser therapy, LLLT, as they called it then, for both RA and OA.
Okay. What about rheumatoid arthritis, RA?
For RA, the results looked quite promising back then. Compared to placebo controls in separate groups, the analysis found LLLT significantly reduced pain by about 70%, which is substantial.
Wow.
It also cut down morning stiffness by nearly half an hour on average and improved finger flexibility. Plus, they noted very few side effects, which is always good.
That sounds pretty positive. Any downsides or things that didn't help?
Yes, and that's important. The analysis found no significant difference for other outcomes like overall functional assessment, the range of motion in the joints, or how much local swelling there was. They also couldn't find any clear link between the results and different laser parameters like dosage, wavelength, or treatment duration for RA. And interestingly, in studies where they treated one hand and used the other as a placebo,
Yeah.
they found no difference between the treated and placebo hand, even though both hands tended to show some improvement in pain and disease activity compared to baseline. That raised some questions.
Interesting. Okay, so promising for RA, pain, and stiffness, but not everything, and some quirks. What about osteoarthritis, OA? That affects so many people.
For OA, the findings in that same 2000 meta-analysis were, well, quite different, much less conclusive. When they pooled the data from the OA trials they included,
What did they find for pain?
they found no statistically significant effect on pain overall.
No effect.
Yeah. And they specifically noted significant heterogeneity, meaning the results for the different OA studies were inconsistent with each other. Other things they looked at for OA, like joint tenderness or mobility, also didn't show significant improvement in their pooled analysis.
Okay, that's a stark contrast. RA looks promising in that review, OA pain doesn't. But you said the other sources we have seem more positive overall about arthritis. How does that square up?
Exactly. This highlights how research evolves and, how different reviews can reach different conclusions based on the studies they include or how they interpret them. The 2000 paper was cautious, especially about OA, and they did mention that the conflicting results might be due to differences in how the therapy was applied or the devices used back then.
Right. Technology changes, understanding changes.
Precisely. So the other sources we looked at, which are either more recent or maybe broader summaries, they generally paint a more optimistic picture. One explicitly says, clinical studies have shown improved pain and reduced inflammation in arthritis patients with regular red light use. Another lists knee arthritis as a common clinical application.
So later perspectives suggest maybe things have improved or our understanding is better.
It seems that way. While that rigorous 2000 analysis was reserved about OA based on the evidence then, the more current materials suggest the overall clinical view for arthritis, maybe including OA, is seen as more promising now. It just shows it's complex, not always a clear-cut answer from a single study or review. Research keeps moving.
Absolutely. Okay, so arthritis is nuanced with evolving views. What about some of those other conditions you listed earlier, like muscle recovery or skin issues?
Yeah, the sources briefly touch on those too. Muscle recovery gets positive mentions in two of the sources, listed as a human clinical indication. The thinking is it helps manage that post-exercise inflammation, potentially reducing soreness, maybe speeding things up.
Okay.
Skin inflammation, rosacea, acne, eczema, also mentioned in two sources as areas where it shows promise. Again, likely tapping into those same anti-inflammatory mechanisms we discussed, but in the skin.
Makes sense.
And that neuropathic inflammation category, nerve pain, maybe cognitive stuff. While a lot of the stronger evidence there seems to come from animal models, like for brain or spinal cord injury,
Right.
one source does list it as a potential clinical benefit, suggesting those cellular effects might apply to the nervous system too. But probably more research needed there for humans.
Definitely seems like it. So we have this interesting science, some supportive clinical findings, but also clear complexities, like with the arthritis data. What are the big roadblocks or challenges that researchers are still facing? What do we need next?
Well, that 2000 meta-analysis actually nailed some key issues that are frankly still relevant today. The biggest one is consistency in research reporting. Researchers just need to be way more detailed and standardized when they publish studies. They need to report exactly the device they used, the specific wavelength, the power output, the dose in joules, the distance from the skin, treatment time, frequency, where exactly on the body was applied.
All those parameters matter, especially with that biphasic dose thing.
Hugely. Without that detailed information, it's almost impossible to compare different studies effectively, or for a clinician or researcher to replicate the results, or figure out which specific protocol actually works best for, say, knee OA versus RA in the hand.
Yeah, you can't compare apples and oranges if you don't know what fruit you've got.
Exactly. And they also emphasized using standardized, validated outcome measures. Everyone needs to measure pain, function, swelling, etc. in a consistent way so results can be properly compared and pooled.
Makes sense.
And there's still ongoing investigation needed into how things like wavelength, dose, duration, and even where you apply the light, like over the joint versus over the nerve, supplying the joint impacts effectiveness.
And do the more recent sources agree on these needs?
Well, yeah. One of the other sources specifically echoes this, calling for more high-quality trials with better standardization. even while finding the existing evidence promising enough for, non-invasive symptom support. The foundation is there, but needs more rigorous building.
Okay, solid point. Consistency is key for moving forward. Now, for listeners who might be intrigued and thinking about this, maybe trying an at-home device,
Hmm.
what do the sources say about using red light therapy safely? And what are the really crucial limitations to keep in mind?
Safety first, absolutely.
Yeah.
One source gives some pretty clear guidelines for home use. First, eye protection is generally a good idea, especially if you're treating anywhere near your face because these lights can be quite bright.
Right.
They suggest starting out slow, maybe short sessions like 5 or 10 minutes, and then gradually increasing duration or frequency based on the device instructions and how you respond.
Don't just blast yourself for an hour on day one.
Definitely not. Always, always follow the manufacturer's specific guidelines for their device. Things like distance from the skin, how often to use it. And remember that biphasic dose response.
More isn't always better.
Exactly. Avoid the temptation to overuse it thinking you'll get faster results.
Mm-hmm.
You might actually make it less effective. Or, who knows, maybe even cause issues, though side effects are generally reported as minimal. Stick to the recommended protocols.
Okay. Sounds like sensible precautions. What about the big picture limitations? What can't it do?
This is probably the most critical point the sources emphasize. Red light therapy is not a replacement for proper medical diagnosis and treatment.
Should be obvious, but good to state clearly.
Absolutely. If you have a chronic health condition or new or worsening symptoms, you need to see a doctor or qualified health professional. Don't try to self-treat serious conditions with just red light therapy.
Right.
And specifically, they warn against using it over suspicious skin moles or any known active cancers unless you are under direct medical supervision from your oncologist or doctor. That's really important.
Definitely.
So it's presented very much as a potential supportive therapy, something that might complement conventional medical care by helping your body's natural inflammatory response and healing processes, not as a cure-all or a standalone treatment for major diseases.
Okay, that's a really vital distinction to hammer home.
Yeah.
So let's recap. We've journeyed from the really small-scale, light-hitting molecules in mitochondria, sparking energy, modulating stress and inflammation signals, all the way up to looking at the clinical research landscape.
Right, including those nuanced findings for arthritis, where older analyses were cautious, but near perspectives seem more hopeful, alongside promising signs for things like muscle recovery and skin inflammation.
So wrapping this all up, what does this mean for you, the listener?
Well, hopefully understanding this mix, the fascinating science, the evolving, sometimes complex clinical evidence, the research challenges, and the crucial safety points helps you better evaluate if exploring red light therapy.
As a potential supportive tool. Exactly. As a supportive tool might be relevant for your own situation. But always, always in conversation with your trusted healthcare professional. Don't go it alone based just on this.
Couldn't agree more. And maybe, just as a final thought to mull over,
Mm-hmm.
given how fundamentally PBM seems to interact with core cellular processes, energy production via mitochondria, cell signaling,
Mm-hmm.
could its potential applications actually be even broader than what we're currently focused on? If you can optimize basic cellular function and modulate inflammation at that level, how might that impact a whole range of other health conditions down the line, maybe ones we don't even link directly to inflammation yet? It's something to think about.
Definitely food for thought about future possibilities.
Hmm.
All right, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us and exploring this complex topic. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and keep learning.